What if the most strategic territory Russia controls is slowly slipping away? What if Crimea, once considered untouchable, is now at the center of a global power shift? Ukraine's latest move has stunned analysts, rattled Moscow, and sent shockwaves across the world. Is this the beginning of the end for Russian dominance in Crimea? Stay with us, because what you're about to hear could redefine this entire war. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we are diving into one of the most explosive questions shaking global politics right now. Is Russia losing its grip on Crimea, the territory it once claimed as permanently secured? For years, Crimea has symbolized Russian power, military reach, and strategic dominance in the Black Sea region. It was presented as a red line, a place beyond challenge. But recent developments suggest that this assumption may no longer hold true. Ukraine's actions, both on the battlefield and diplomatically, have introduced new uncertainty into what was once considered a settled matter. International observers, defense analysts, and governments worldwide are now paying close attention to Crimea again, not as a frozen conflict, but as a potential turning point. This moment matters because Crimea is not just land. It is leverage, symbolism, and strategy combined. Control of Crimea affects shipping routes, military logistics, and regional security far beyond Ukraine and Russia. What makes this situation even more dramatic is how quietly yet effectively Ukraine has reshaped the narrative. Without declaring victory, Ukraine has forced the world to ask questions Russia hoped would never be asked. Today's video breaks down what changed, why it matters, and how this moment could reshape the future of the war. Stay with us as we analyze the moves, the reactions, and the consequences unfolding right now. To understand why Crimea is so critical, we need to look at its strategic importance. Crimea sits at the heart of the Black Sea, acting as a military launchpad, naval hub, and surveillance center. Whoever controls it gains influence over trade routes, regional security, and military operations across Eastern Europe. For Russia, Crimea has been more than territory, it has been proof of strength. Since 2014, Moscow invested heavily in fortifications, air defenses, and naval infrastructure, presenting the peninsula as impenetrable. This perception discouraged direct challenges and reinforced Russia's image of control. However, wars are not static, and neither is strategy. Ukraine has spent years adapting, learning, and recalibrating its approach. Instead of rushing headlong into symbolic attacks, Ukraine focused on weakening logistics, morale, and operational confidence. This slow but calculated strategy has begun to show results. Military analysts now note increasing pressure points around Crimea's supply lines and defenses. At the same time, international support for Ukraine has expanded in capability and scope. Advanced intelligence sharing, longer-range systems, and coordinated planning have changed the battlefield equation. Crimea is no longer isolated from consequences. Every development there sends ripples through global markets, military alliances, and diplomatic discussions. This is why the question of Crimea's future is no longer hypothetical. It is now part of active global debate, signaling that the status quo may be shifting in ways few expected even a year ago. Ukraine's recent moves surrounding Crimea have been described by experts as calculated rather than reckless. Instead of announcing dramatic breakthroughs, Ukraine has allowed actions to speak louder than statements. Precision strikes, intelligence operations, and pressure on infrastructure have demonstrated reach and intent. These actions send a clear message: Crimea is not beyond influence. What makes this especially impactful is the psychological dimension. Military conflicts are fought not only with weapons, but with perception. By showing capability without overclaiming success, Ukraine has unsettled Russian confidence while maintaining credibility with international partners. Analysts note that even limited disruptions can have outsized effects when they challenge long-held assumptions. For Russia, defending Crimea requires resources, manpower, and constant vigilance. This strains an already stretched military posture. For Ukraine, every successful operation reinforces the idea that no area is permanently lost. This narrative shift matters deeply for morale, both domestically and internationally. It reassures allies that continued support has tangible results. It also forces Russia to reconsider how it allocates defenses, potentially weakening other fronts. Importantly, Ukraine's strategy avoids premature declarations that could backfire politically or militarily. Instead, it builds pressure gradually, allowing room for adaptation. This methodical approach is why many experts describe Ukraine's actions as stunning rather than symbolic. They are changing the conversation, not just the map, and that change may prove just as decisive as any single battlefield victory. Russia's response to these developments reveals growing concern beneath official messaging. Public statements continue to emphasize control and resilience, but actions tell a more complex story. Increased security measures, redeployment of assets, and intensified information campaigns suggest that Crimea is no longer treated as entirely secure. History shows that when a power feels confident, it does not need to constantly reinforce narratives. The heightened focus on Crimea indicates sensitivity to both internal and external audiences. Domestically, Crimea holds symbolic value tied to national pride and political legitimacy. Any perception of vulnerability there carries significant political risk. Internationally, Russia understands that perceptions influence diplomacy, sanctions, and alliances. Maintaining an image of control is therefore essential. However, maintaining that image becomes harder when observable actions contradict it. Satellite imagery, open source intelligence, and independent reporting make it difficult to fully control the narrative. Each reported incident, no matter how small, feeds global discussion. This creates a feedback loop where perception influences policy and policy influences action. Russia now faces the challenge of defending not just territory, but credibility. This is a difficult position for any state, especially during prolonged conflict. The more resources dedicated to Crimea's defense, the fewer available elsewhere. This strategic dilemma underscores why Ukraine's approach has been effective. By forcing Russia to react, Ukraine shapes the tempo of events. In modern warfare, controlling the tempo often determines outcomes more than sheer force alone. Global reactions to the situation in Crimea highlight its far-reaching implications. Western governments, defense institutions, and international organizations are carefully assessing what these developments mean for regional stability. While official statements remain cautious, behind-the-scenes discussions are increasingly focused on long-term scenarios involving Crimea. Financial markets also pay attention, as instability in the Black Sea affects energy routes, grain exports, and shipping insurance costs. Even countries geographically distant from Ukraine feel indirect consequences. This interconnectedness is why Crimea's status resonates globally. For Ukraine's allies, these developments reinforce the belief that sustained support can alter outcomes over time. For neutral states, it raises questions about future alignments and security guarantees. For adversaries, it serves as a case study in resilience and adaptive strategy. Importantly, global reactions are shaped by credibility. Ukraine's careful communication ensures that claims align with observable facts, strengthening trust. This contrasts with overconfident messaging that can erode legitimacy if disproven. As a result, Ukraine's narrative gains traction across diplomatic and media platforms. Meanwhile, Russia faces increasing skepticism as contradictions emerge between statements and developments. This dynamic influences everything from arms deliveries to diplomatic engagement. In essence, Crimea has become a barometer for the broader conflict. How events unfold there will shape not only military calculations, but also political decisions worldwide. The world is watching closely, not for dramatic headlines alone, but for signs of lasting change. Another critical aspect of this situation is the human dimension often overlooked in strategic analysis. Crimea is home to civilians whose lives are directly affected by shifts in control, security measures, and economic conditions. Increased militarization impacts daily routines, access to services, and freedom of movement. Information restrictions and heightened surveillance contribute to an atmosphere of uncertainty. These conditions influence public sentiment in ways that can have long-term consequences. Ukraine's approach emphasizes legitimacy and international law, aiming to position itself as a responsible actor concerned with civilian well-being. This focus matters because post-conflict governance requires trust and reconstruction, not just military success. International organizations observe these factors when assessing future aid and engagement. Russia, on the other hand, must manage both security and public perception under increasing strain. The more resources diverted to control, the greater the burden on local populations. History suggests that prolonged pressure can erode compliance and loyalty over time. While this does not determine immediate outcomes, it shapes the environment in which future decisions are made. The human factor also influences global opinion. Media coverage of civilian impact affects public support for policies and alliances. In this sense, Crimea's future is not decided solely by military calculations, but by the broader social and political context. Understanding this dimension helps explain why incremental changes can be powerful. They alter lived realities, not just strategic maps, and those realities accumulate into lasting transformation. Technology and intelligence play a decisive role in the evolving situation around Crimea. Modern conflicts rely heavily on information dominance, surveillance, and precision capabilities. Ukraine's effective use of intelligence has allowed it to identify vulnerabilities and act with calculated restraint. This reduces risk while maximizing impact. The integration of real-time data, satellite imagery, and coordinated planning represents a shift from earlier phases of the conflict. It demonstrates learning and adaptation under pressure. Russia, while possessing significant capabilities, faces challenges in countering decentralized and flexible approaches. Static defenses can be effective, but they are costly and require constant upkeep. Each adjustment invites further adaptation from the opposing side. This dynamic creates an ongoing contest of innovation. Importantly, technological transparency limits narrative control. Independent analysts and open-source investigators can verify or challenge claims rapidly. This accountability shapes international response. States are less likely to accept unverified assertions and more likely to rely on corroborated evidence. Ukraine's alignment with this reality enhances its credibility. Meanwhile, Russia's traditional emphasis on information control encounters structural limits in a connected world. This technological context explains why even small developments around Crimea attract outsized attention. They are quickly analyzed, shared, and debated globally. In such an environment, maintaining absolute control becomes increasingly difficult. The balance of power is influenced not only by hardware, but by who adapts faster to the information age. Looking ahead, several scenarios emerge regarding Crimea's future. None involve immediate or simplistic outcomes. Instead, the most likely trajectory is continued pressure combined with strategic patience. Ukraine appears focused on keeping Crimea within reach rather than forcing a premature confrontation. This approach preserves flexibility and minimizes risk. For Russia, the challenge is sustaining long-term defense without overextension. Economic pressures, manpower constraints, and diplomatic isolation all factor into decision-making. International actors will continue to influence outcomes through policy choices, support levels, and negotiation frameworks. Importantly, any future settlement will need to address legitimacy, security, and reconstruction. Crimea's status cannot be resolved in isolation from the broader conflict. This complexity is why current developments matter so much. They shape the conditions under which future decisions will be made. Each shift in perception, each operational adjustment, contributes to a new baseline. Analysts often emphasize that wars end not with single dramatic moments, but with accumulated changes that make previous positions untenable. Crimea may be approaching such a phase, not because of a single decisive blow, but because sustained pressure alters the cost-benefit calculation. Understanding this helps temper expectations while recognizing significance. The question is no longer whether Crimea matters, but how its evolving situation will redefine the balance of power in the region. Media narratives surrounding Crimea play a powerful role in shaping understanding and expectations. Sensational headlines can obscure nuance, while careful analysis provides clarity. Ukraine's communication strategy emphasizes measured language, allowing facts to build the story. This restraint enhances credibility and avoids the pitfalls of overstatement. Russia's messaging, by contrast, relies heavily on certainty and finality, which can be risky when circumstances evolve. Audiences today are more skeptical and better informed than ever before. They compare sources, analyze evidence, and question inconsistencies. This environment rewards transparency and punishes exaggeration. As a result, narratives that align with observable reality gain traction. Crimea's story is increasingly told through data, analysis, and expert commentary rather than official declarations alone. This shift empowers independent voices and reduces the effectiveness of traditional propaganda. For viewers, this means greater responsibility to evaluate information critically. Understanding context, sources, and intent becomes essential. This video aims to contribute to that understanding by focusing on what can be reasonably assessed rather than what is emotionally satisfying. The goal is not to declare outcomes prematurely, but to explain why the question itself has become so important. By examining moves, reactions, and implications, we gain insight into the broader dynamics at play. In doing so, we move beyond slogans toward meaningful understanding of one of the most consequential geopolitical issues of our time. As we conclude this analysis, it becomes clear why the question of Crimea's future resonates so strongly. It represents more than a territorial dispute. It symbolizes shifting power, adaptive strategy, and the limits of control in a changing world. Ukraine's stunning move is not defined by a single event, but by a pattern of actions that challenge assumptions. Russia's response reflects the difficulty of maintaining dominance under sustained pressure. The international community watches because the outcome will influence global norms, alliances, and security structures. This moment underscores the importance of patience, credibility, and adaptability in modern conflict. No outcome is guaranteed, and no timeline is certain. However, the conversation has undeniably changed. Crimea is no longer treated as a closed chapter. It is an open question, and that alone marks a significant shift. Understanding this helps viewers move beyond binary thinking toward a more nuanced perspective. History often turns on such moments, when certainty gives way to possibility. Whether Crimea ultimately changes hands or remains contested, The process unfolding now will shape the region for years to come. Staying informed, critical, and engaged is essential. This story is still being written, and its implications extend far beyond any single map or headline. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an in-depth breakdown like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know how you see the situation evolving.